So I think it's important to share and unpack some recent research from the Journal of Occupational Environmental Medicine. It's also done by Black Dog Institute and New South Wales Health. They produced a list of the top 9 workplace factors leading to mental ill health. And when I first saw this list, I was genuinely shocked to see poor change management is on the list of top contributors.
Welcome to episode 38 of the Inner Game of Change podcast, where I focus on exploring the multi-layers of managing and enabling organizational change. My name is Ali Juma, and you're listening to the Inner Game of Change podcast. Today I'm delighted to chat with Dr. Temre Green, an organizational psychologist, change management consultant, and a corporate leader, recognized by Westpac Banking Group as a top woman of influence. Temre has designed and planned strategic transformation programs that help Australian businesses become stronger during change. In this episode, Temre and I chat about the important topic of safeguarding our mental health during change in the workplace. I am grateful to have Temre chatting with me today. Well, Temre, good morning, and thank you so much for joining me in the Inner Game of Change podcast. I'm grateful for your time today.
Well, I love what you're doing in exploring all of these complex layers of change, and I am delighted that you've invited me to contribute. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your time. And before we dive deep into our topic today, which is around safeguarding our mental health during change, which is really an important topic, especially nowadays, it'll be fantastic to introduce yourself to my listeners, Temre.
Well, I grew up in Southern California and made my way to Sydney, Australia in 2007. I now live on the south coast of New South Wales with my husband and son. And I actually just want to acknowledge the traditional owners of that land on North Yuin country. It is a beautiful place to live, work, raise a family. You'll often find us outdoors on the lake or at the beach. So I genuinely appreciate the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people of that area. My background is in industrial organizational psychology. And I started my career as a management consultant for a few years in the US before making my way to Australia. And I have been in consulting, corporate leadership roles, mostly around transformation and change. And as we are here recording today, I am 10 days into a new role, which is general manager for change management.
Fantastic. And look, Australia is richer with people like you in it, Temre. So I really appreciate that. And I hope Australia is considered as well your second home now.
Absolutely.
Yeah, fantastic. And we're going to dive deep into it. So talk to me about, well, first of all, congratulations on a new role. Good luck with that. Talk to me about why is it important that we understand how change impacts our mental health. And as you would know, nowadays we've got lots of change happening in the workplace. We've got the velocity of it, the speed, the volume, all of those things happening at the same time on the back of, a very dramatic event in history, which is COVID as well. How do you see the picture from where you sit?
So I think it's important to share and unpack some recent research from the Journal of Occupational Environmental Medicine. It's also done by Black Dog Institute and New South Wales Health. They produced a list of the top 9 workplace factors leading to mental ill health. And when I first saw this list, I was genuinely shocked to see poor change management is on the list of top contributors. This is a list that I will share, but, it also has workplace violence and bullying on the list. And I was, as somebody who's been in the field for over 20 years, really felt that it was so important to further understand how change impacts our mental health, and to make sure that I started to build some awareness around this and talk about some practical things that we could do in the community to ensure that we start safeguarding mental health when we're doing our jobs. And so the angle that I take here is really around looking at those recipients of change, the people on the receiving end of organizational change. And I should probably even give a small disclaimer to say, because while I am a psychologist, I've never been a clinical psychologist. I studied human behavior at work. And as you mentioned, that high velocity, high volume of change, there are things that we can start to do to improve our change management practices. So I'm excited to start to share a little bit of that with you.
Sure. Fantastic. And look, I think I also I was reading more about the topic recently, and mental health, I think, is number 3 in the ladder of after chronic diseases. And also I think there's a rise of stress-related work compensation.
Actually, we should talk about that a little bit, because here we are in Australia, and Australia, if you look at global data, has the highest share in the population of mental illness in the world. And mental illness, as it's defined by the World Health Organization, is characterized by the presence of symptoms, that disrupt your life and your ability to function across, relationships through to work. And it is different to stress and burnout. Those actually are not mental illnesses. That's when we kind of cross over into talking about, our well-being and how well we manage the pressure that's put upon us. The other thing to call out is the top 3 mental illnesses in Australia, which in this order are anxiety, depression, and substance abuse.
Yeah. And anxiety, I think, do you have any stats on the age group? Because from my memory, the age group was between 21 to 35, which is kind of your working age group, which is alarming. And also what I noticed that it's higher in female than in male. And I'm not too sure if that's because males don't report it and then females report it more. What's your take on that?
Gosh, I haven't actually looked at the specific and gender differences there. I might take that up after this.
Sure.
But nonetheless, important for everyone to feel comfortable, to be able to have somebody to talk to, to be able to express themselves, and if needed, most importantly, get help.
Yes. Yep. What are some of the costs for a business if they actually don't pay attention to how or safeguarding, their employees' mental health during change?
Well, of course, you're going to see some costs and some will go unseen. There are numbers attached to things like sick leave and psychological injuries, but it's harder to see when people are coming to work and they are unwell and they're going through the, if you will, the motions. And when you think about what we do in delivering change, it can add a burden to those individuals. Well, actually, sorry, maybe I should be clear. It probably could add a bit of a burden to anyone. And I think that's the real key call out here, is that we're talking about healthy people, people who may have already in some way feel compromised. If I go back to that top 9 list of workplace factors, at the top of the list is excessive demands and low control. We understand that. It goes on with lack of support, low recognition, job uncertainty, unfair work practices, unclear job descriptions. These are all things that we've become very familiar with and have probably been exacerbated in light of the pandemic.
So you talked about the excessive demand and lack of control. One of the things that we do in the change community, obviously part of our key role is actually to help the business create certainty and allow a level of autonomy. And we think if we do that right, that perhaps can help with creating less anxiety in the workplace as a result of change. But we are driven by a project agenda. Often we are driven by a timeline. How can a business, from where you sit, how can managers keep a good balance between delivery, but also showing the highest level of care for their people?
Let me start by saying, a lot of the pieces that have come out of the research, those top 9, can be improved by better management practices. And I think that needs to be called out regardless of change or anything. If leaders are listening to this, it's important that they are aware of those factors. Now, in terms of what we can do as change managers and change leaders, I can give you just a couple ideas. One of the first that comes to mind, of course, is when we start a project, we often go out looking in the business for subject matter experts to provide their expertise in helping us understand what will change, perhaps understanding, potential impacts and whether it's positive, potentially negative, how it'll be viewed. And one of the first things we do is we put excessive demand on them, and we don't give any control in the design. Yeah. And, that is something that we could probably start to improve upon. Maybe it's about co-designing. And of course, these are trending topics right now, taking a human-centered approach to designing change and to involve that subject matter expert. But that is one way. Another way, I'm trying to think, just to help people, to help leaders, is to, of course, if I go to the opposite end of a program, is to think about that sustainability. Make sure we're not leaving something in place that perhaps is unclear or feels unfair. There are projects, some people listening will appreciate that they have been on projects where the scope was to include a workaround process or something that's left unfinished. Yeah. And you've done the project. Yes, you did what was in the brief, but have you done the right thing by the people on the receiving end? And what is the impact of that over time? And I think the hardest thing for me, as somebody who, not only is a practitioner, but has, been a leader of leaders in change, is I've come to the conclusion that it's just not acceptable to do that anymore. Even though I think, 5, 8 years ago, it's felt more acceptable to do that. But if you've been at the boardroom table where a decision has been made to go for, speed over transparency, or stick with an inadequate budget, this research should come up right then and there in that conversation and say, look, the impact is now clear. Those practices can no longer be tolerated, and we're going to have to take a more human, more sustainable approach. So, I hope that leaders can start that now.
Yes. And look, you mentioned something really important, which is we've got those two forces. We've got a business that is going, the machinery is going as business as usual. We've got a project group that is driven predominantly by a timeline. And then we knock on people's doors looking for SMEs to actually help us understand the case. So often we are driven by our own agenda, and we put inadvertently more pressure on those groups. And not understanding the context and the history of those groups and what they've gone through as well. Because often change managers, there's a higher percentage of us are actually contractors. So we come from outside and we're trying to drive something internally. One of the things that I've done with a client actually recently, I spent maybe about 3 weeks trying to understand the history over the last couple of years before we got to where we are now. And one of the things that I've presented to the senior management group was a hangover from 2 types of restructures during the pandemic as well. And so when I compared it with their ambitious agenda to drive change, the question to them is that you can deliver it, but you're going to add more stress to your people, and you still haven't really managed the hangover from a restructure. People are still learning new jobs because they've been redeployed somewhere else. And so you've got this confluence of all of those issues happening. And the final decision was, maybe we need to reprioritize the whole change agenda,
because,
which is really
insightful for them, I'm sure.
Yeah, which is really, but, the most important thing is that I needed to present it in a business-like manner because the audience were all business people. But the majority of them do care about their own people as well. It was reasonable, but it was logical as well, that how I presented the information. And also, I didn't just present them with a problem. I presented them with options as solutions as well. Reprioritization, see which projects they need to pause completely. And then out of that reprioritization, I've also designed a communication plan. So they went back to the audience, to the employees, and said, as a result of all the changes, we respect that, we've got an ambitious agenda, and therefore, as part of our care for you, we actually reprioritized everything. And that was really a positive message that we went back to the community, to the employees. So sometimes inadvertently, we cause more stress on the workplace. Another example, really simple, sometimes we schedule people for the next 3 months, and we bombard them with 20, 30 invites all of a sudden sitting in my inbox as an SME, and I've got absolutely no idea who you are, what change you're trying to drive. And so sometimes we have to be mindful of our own practices and understand the change impact first without talking only about it.
I'll add a point to that. There's some interesting research around executive mental health. And one of the key points I took away from that research, that I'm happy to share a link for your audience.
Sure.
But it was that executives who take on an additional role are twice as likely to have depression. And I immediately thought of executives that take on sponsor roles, without perhaps fully understanding the importance of a sponsor during a transformation or any period of change, the amount of work that's expected. And as I was unpacking that paper, it really dawned on me that we may have leaders who also in some way are being compromised by the additional workload they didn't realize they were going to take on. And of course, there's still a lot to say about how we might support them and bring them up in terms of what's expected of them. And that's probably a different conversation altogether. But nonetheless, just to add to what you were saying there, it's so important that we're aware of both the recipients of change and those around us.
Yeah, absolutely. A really great point now. I've given me some ideas about the sponsor. We often demand a lot from them, but we actually pay little attention because we think they're supposed to be doing it without paying a lot of attention. Look, you made me think about this particular topic, which is really great. How talking about management, dealing with mental issues or employees with anxiety, because sometimes these are not seen, they are hidden things. And managers are not really experts in identifying that. So what are some of the strategies that managers can deploy to be able to identify or create an environment that is actually open to report on that?
We'll give you 3 types of ideas. And of course, this comes because we couldn't very well have everyone psychologically assessed. That would be incredibly inappropriate.
Yes.
But let me give you 3 types of ways that an organization or a leadership team could go about in appropriately assessing their workforce. The 3 categories are looking at past data, then present data, and then some predictive data. So if you just want to look at past data and start to get a sense, you might be able to look up your sick days and absentee data. You could look at the number of work-related psychological injuries and then how quickly somebody was able to return to the workforce after that. You may have some good information from past exit interviews or focus groups. If you wanted to look at present data and run perhaps some internal surveys, you could do a comparison of your organization's mental health strategies to other similar organizations. You could run an audit of company-wide mental health practices. You could run an audit of leadership and management training on mental health. Do you even know if your leaders are trained or not? You could also run an audit on mental health literacy and knowledge and training. Can a leader define mental illness versus stress, burnout, fatigue? I mean, they're very different. If I was going to look at predictive information, and this is me not saying that research has shown a correlation, this is something that I have explored, is using an analysis to identify an individual's sources of stress. The one that I used, I don't mind sharing it. It's called the Stress Quotient by TTI Success Insights Australia. Another one that I would recommend, although I haven't had as much exposure to it, is an analysis of your organization's psychological safety. The one that I've explored is the PS25 by Conductor.
Yeah.
And the last one is to do an analysis of an organization's culture. Culture plays an important role in mental health and well-being. And the assessment that I would suggest there is the culture suite, which also is done by TTI Success Insights Australia. So, between those three, I really think an organization could make a strategy and a plan that could support their workforce, even if it's not just about projects and, what we do in our work. It could just be across the entire organization to support their people.
Yeah, but what you're talking about here is that if a business does all of those things, or actually a combination of all of those things, it will achieve two key things. One is that we look after our people as a human to human. And the second thing is actually it does make a business sense, because you'll have less sick days, and therefore your productivity can be really good as well. So from a cost, for those who are driven by business cost, this can be a good thing to do. Mm-hmm. And for those who are driven by care, predominantly for other people, then this is a good thing to do as well. So we talked about the management. What about the employee? What are the things that an employee can do to manage their mental health during change? Because I do believe managing the change is a mutual responsibility and a team sport. So what are our responsibilities as employees? What things can we do to help us navigate through change with minimum impact on our mental health?
Of course. I want to say to anyone who is listening to this, if it is so hard to say, if you are feeling unwell, go do something. And I see this with corporate programs. Why aren't people just, helping themselves? Well, we're humans, and unfortunately, we tend to self-medicate before we self-care.
Yes.
So, look, the best thing that I could do as a non-expert here is to say, please have a level of self-awareness about yourself. That means being mindful of how you're feeling, being mindful of how you react to those feelings.
Yeah.
What steps you're taking in terms of how you might make yourself feel better. And it is an honest look at yourself to then decide if it's the right time to make a change in your personal life. That could be that you're not in the right job. That could be that you're not in the right relationship, or it could be something else. And then from there, I think for me, I'm going to just propose something practical here, where it is about understanding the sources quite clearly of it could be mental ill health, or it could just be stress that's going left unmanaged, that is turning into burnout, that is, bordering on depression. There's a sequence there. And I think that if you can pinpoint what it is that is let's just call it a root cause, I would say, address that the best you can in any way that you can. I think if you ask somebody else, I'm sure there's going to be other techniques. It could be that you need to meditate. It could be that you want to do yoga. It could be that you need to have exercise more. And those things are fine. They're, I'm just going to, I think that's for somebody else to probably share who has, expertise in those areas. For me, meditation doesn't work, but something like boxing will, everyone's a bit different. But if you really do want to look after yourself, it's going to start with self-awareness and self-honesty. And
I think it's an individual thing. You are right around how we manage that. Look, my take on it is, and I encourage everyone that I come in contact with, my friends or, people that I meet in my network or even my clients, is that because it's a team sport, it's a mutual responsibility. Expect from me to do all of those things for you. And I expect from you to ask me questions that will clarify things for you. So by not asking questions, you're not helping anybody. So I always say, ask questions. Every time a change is coming your way as an employee, I really need you to ask those questions. Show me the roadmap. Show me what the change is. Show me how the change is going to help me move from A to B, considering B is better. Show me how you're going to train me. Show me how you're going to support me. And show me how you're going to support me when I stuff up during the process. Show me how you're going to support me if I'm going to be on holidays during the change. So all of those things, what we're trying to do here, create that level of certainty for you so it will be less stressful, because the uncertainty creates that stress. And I know stress is not quite the mental, separate from mental illness, but it can ultimately, small things actually can cause more problems for us later. It's almost like educating my employees and the people that I work with to be their own change managers. And so you need to ask me all the questions. And if I don't have an answer for you, I will need to go and find an answer for you as well, because sometimes I don't have all the answers for you.
That's great. It's all about taking that real human approach, very practical, and keeping it sustainable.
Yeah, and sometimes we create our own, because there are symbols. And I think I talked to another guest in one of the podcasts. Sometimes we do create that environment that can create a lot of stress. For example, nowadays we do talk a lot about agile, and then we've got the Kanbans everywhere in an organizations. We've got the boards and the walls full of sticky notes and all of that. And it's only the tech people actually that understand all of this. So for an employee to pass by those walls, it's like, what the hell is this? What are they cooking? And how is that going to impact me? So sometimes we create those symbols. And as you mentioned, the word culture, the symbols can contribute to what sort of culture we are about. And so sometimes we do shoot ourselves in the foot when it comes to change.
Agreed.
Yeah. And especially when we, on one hand, we say human-centered design, on the other hand, it's only on the wall, and nobody's engaging with me as an individual. So we can have that problem. I want your take on psychological safety. Is that related to the safeguarding our mental health?
I think there's a link, and I don't know to what degree there's a deeper correlation, but the link, of course, is if you are able to speak up without risk of being reprimanded and hurt in some way.
Yeah.
If you do have an environment or a culture, I should say, an organizational culture where there is low psychological safety and you can't speak up, well, you're unlikely to talk about, perhaps from, the most basic levels of what's going wrong on your project to perhaps some other workplace factor like bullying that's occurring, in your project team, through to feeling like something is unfair, or to being able to openly express to your manager that you are experiencing excessive demands and you don't have the support you need to be able to respond to those, So that can absolutely add up, which is why I do feel there is a good link here between high psychological safety and high well-being and mental health. And so maybe somebody will do a study on that, or we have to look that up together afterwards. Yes. But look, and I think that if we want to talk about where does that all begin, I'm going to go ahead and just go to the start of it there, which is where your recruitment practices.
Yeah.
You need to be mindful of recruiting leaders that are going to create that psychologically safe environment, not people who might diminish it or hopefully it's inadvertently, but inadvertently, be hurting people or causing them to feel like they can't speak up. So I would say, if we're talking about, the values of an organization and how they link to leadership, the role that leaders play, and probably, even if I may make this leap, and I appreciate there is a bit of a leap, but there is probably a leap to being able to be a whistleblower, having a platform where you can find a voice anonymously.
Yeah. And look, the way I look at psychological safety during which is really especially during change, because we do create threat during change. If you're fully competent and you've been fully competent on a process for a number of years, and all of a sudden we're actually transforming the whole process, overnight you become incompetent. And that can be a huge threat to a lot of people. So creating an environment that is less threat and more reward, because that's the organizing principle of our brains, is that we try to maximize reward and minimize threat. If you create less threat, then chances are it will be better adoption of the change, more positive responses. And if that happens, then next time you roll out a change, the organization, well, the employees will not be in a situation that they will compare this with the historical way to manage change. And if it's a positive thing, and I think we talked about this before we started recording, the aim is to create that positive change experience. And it's only through creating that positive change experience, people feel less threatened, which hopefully will move into, I feel safer when an organization or my organization talks about change next time. So that's how I think about it. But any change by nature is disruptive, and disruption can create threat. And it's an interesting thing also that if I am in a threat mode or under threat mode, my cognitive abilities will be diminished as well or depreciated, which doesn't help the organization anyway. So you can still achieve your timeline and your milestone and close the project. But to be honest, who cares?
Yeah, you're pulling from some great neuroscience principles there. And it's important that change, and I think more and more change managers are starting to look at those principles and apply them. And I completely agree that not only focusing on rewards, but if you do everything on time and on budget, but you've left behind a workforce that is unwell, doesn't want to be there, and is about to walk out the door, we can't very well call that a success.
Yeah, look, and there's a saying, or it's almost, I don't know, it's a saying, or call it whatever you want to call it. So sometimes it's like a doctor. A doctor will follow their checklist of things, and they've done everything right, but the patient dies. And so what benefit is it for me that the doctor has done everything perfect? Like the plane, the pilot would have done everything perfect, but the plane crashes. And so the point is not really the checklist. The point is not the timeline. The point is actually that we have the employee adopting this change. That's really the aim of the change. So the software is not the change. It's the change is all about the people side of things. And otherwise, it will be a useless exercise. And then, the employees will suffer, the business will suffer as a business.
And just to pick up what you said there, because we've always talked about change management being the people side or people component of projects. And yes. I think that's why this topic was particularly shocking to me, because we have research that is clear that what we're doing isn't really protecting people's mental health. And that is at probably at the core of what we're here to do. Granted, there's so much more of the detail and projects, but to be truly on the people side of change, we have to spread this message. I think we have to be able to talk about it, build up awareness, and start to help the change management community to improve upon these practices, to ensure that people's mental health continues to either be safeguarded, or people who perhaps are unwell have every opportunity to become well.
Fantastic. So good segue to a question that I usually ask my guests, Temre. As a change practice community, what's your advice to us?
So I'll stay specifically around this topic of mental health before going into anything too general. When you're at the start of a project and you are going through stakeholder engagement, which you inevitably will, as a change manager, I want to challenge you to be honest about what you're actually about to do. Because if you have a business case that is already approved, the team is established, and you are starting your engagement, I want you to ask yourself if you're actually engaging. Because what you're probably doing is telling them under this veil of, I'm going to get some advice, I'm really going to listen, I'm going to engage properly. But here's the question. Can the business case be changed based off of what you hear? Will the timeline change off of what you hear? Will the outcome change off of what you hear? I think we need to be clear with the people that we're engaging, because there's 3 types of stakeholder engagement. Just if I'm going really high level here, 3 types. 1, you're telling them. 2, you're saying, okay, we've got a business case. We know that this is the solution, but we don't know how you work. So can you help me shape the solution to what we're trying to achieve? The 3rd is we have a budget. We've got 3 options that fit into that budget. We are here to properly engage you and, get a vote. Which of these 3 is best for you, the user? And if you start to look at stakeholder engagement with that lens, I assure you we will be on the right track for improving mental health. Because unfortunately, as humans, when you not unfortunately, that's the wrong word, but unfortunately for what we do here. But the truth is when we do go out and we are saying, we really want to hear you, we take the notes, we actually do the right thing, and nothing ever comes from that information that was gathered during stakeholder engagement, that is the beginning of trust being broken and the beginning of the potential for impacting mental well-being in that audience group. So my advice is to think about how you're approaching your stakeholder engagement. Are you in a position where you have to just tell them and let's take a sensible approach to that? Or is there an opportunity for them to shape it? Is there an opportunity to make a vote? How early were you engaged as the change manager to even do this? So I do hope that helps. It's a little bit of advice that could be taken probably in light of what we're talking about here in mental health, or just in terms of good practices and good human-centered design and looking after people and seeing to what degree they're going to co-create the solution. So I do hope your audience finds that little tip helpful.
Fantastic. And I always think, Temre, that our job as change practitioners is actually to influence and build relationships. The technical side is really the boring side, is we're dealing with a human here. And the other thing that I also ask sometimes, which is a challenging thing for people to do, can you measure how strong your relationship is with your stakeholders? And people often say, well, how would I measure it? Well, you're going to have to measure it. And one of the things that I always look at, if I've engaged well and positively and in the right way, the way you described it, is that you can measure that. You can measure it by the level of support you get from stakeholders and level of availability as well. If I ask for information and then people are forthcoming with the information, that is, you are in a good spot. And so therefore you need to maintain that like any other good relationship. If you ask for a time from a stakeholder and they make themselves available, rather easily or smoothly, that's a good sign. They are engaged, meaning you've already done a good job to engage with those audiences. Anything outside of this, just know that the relationship is not strong. And so therefore you will default into the telling, part of what you just mentioned.
Well said. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you so much. And we are coming to the end of the podcast. Temre, I'm really enjoying this. This is also the point of us as change managers looking after our mental health as well, because we are in the thick of it. But this might be another conversation for us in the future. How would listeners and employers contact you?
I'm always available on LinkedIn, and I know you've got pretty broad audience, a global audience. So I'd just say, if we don't already have some form of a connection in place, then to please leave a personal note. I find not many people know how to do that on LinkedIn. So I'm a little off topic here, but I'm just going to explain it, because if you are on a desktop, you have to click connect, and then you need to add a note. Yeah. And please just mention that you have heard me on the podcast, or you're connected to Ali. And the other way on a mobile phone is you do not click connect. Instead, you click the three dots and then you say personalized invite. That's what you click. Then you get to say, heard you on the podcast, because I would be more than happy to connect with your audience. And I am really, again, happy to be sharing this message. I hope it's being well received by our colleagues in change and projects. And I am genuinely hopeful and believe that we will start to make a difference in this space.
Fantastic. And we are going to publish this podcast at the start of 2023. So that might be a good start for our listeners and the community out there to pay attention to your mental health, and also to those who you work with. That can be really a good start for 2023. Temre, it's been a pleasure having you in my podcast, The Inner Game of Change. I hope I can get you back at some stage in the future, and we tackle this from a different angle, perhaps. Perhaps we tackle the mental health for the change managers and the sponsor as well. So that can be a good conversation in the future. Until then, stay well and stay safe, Temre.
You as well. Thank you, Ali.
Thank you very much. Hi, everyone. I hope you enjoyed listening to this episode. To know more about my guests and this podcast, check the innergameofchange.com.au website and remember to subscribe. I can't wait to share with you my next episode. Until then, stay well and stay safe.